Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today, helping to create a better tomorrow, not just for us, but for all our friends in the animal kingdom and our pets. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Holly Ganz, who is the Chief Science Officer and co-founder of AnimalBiome, which is a company that has a goal to help cats and dogs lead longer, happier lives, ultimately using science to help unlock the mysteries of the pet gut microbiome, providing access to a range of genetic data on the health of the gut microbiome, better ways to log health, diet records, and ultimately offer remedies to help treat chronic digestive disorders and other conditions in these companion animals. Dr. Ganz received her bachelor's in biology from George Washington University, her master's from Scripps Institute of Oceanography and Marine Biology, her PhD from UC Davis in Entomology and Evolutionary Ecology, and for the last couple decades has been really deep in studying the interaction between microbes and their hosts. After receiving her doctorate, Dr. Ganz was awarded an international postdoc fellowship from the National Science Foundation, where she was studying how genetics ultimately affect the spread of various fungal infections in animal populations. She also did a postdoc fellow at UC Berkeley studying bacterial pathogens surviving in soil and how they infect African wildlife. She's published a couple dozen papers in the peer-reviewed literature, and we're glad to have her with us today. Dr. Holly Ganz, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. I really enjoyed sort of reading through your bio and then looking at some of your postdoc work, which spanned areas from studying epidemiology and these microbial ecologies in grazing animals. You studied microbes that cause periodontal disease in dogs. Really fascinating range of topics. And then you got onto the entrepreneurial side and you started AnimalBiome. Talk a little bit about those early days, if you would. Some of what you were doing beforehand and what got you interested in setting up this company.
Yeah, in a sense, it really grew out of the postdoctoral work I was doing on soil ecology. I was working at with some researchers at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and they had invented a method for characterizing all known bacteria using a gene chip. And we started using it for soil. I was really interested as a community ecologist in how soil microorganisms were interacting to affect the survival of pathogens and parasites in the environment, and how they moved to grazing animals. But I fell in love with my herding dog, who I had adopted in grad school, and decided I wanted to apply that technology to companion animals. I started studying oral microbiome in dogs at the vet school at UC Davis. And then we got really interested in trying to study cats and a cat microbiome. And I had some trouble getting funding for that. So I decided to do a Kickstarter. And I asked people to, if they would support our efforts and send us a bit of cat poop in the mail. And then we would sequence it, look at the bacteria, and just try and create a baseline for like what does the cat microbiome look like, and could we see if there are any things like, does it vary with lifestyle or diet or disease states? But I really just started talking to people about their pet cats, and a lot of them had a cat with chronic diarrhea. And they had been on this sort of medical merry-go-round where they tried everything. They had tried prescription diets. They'd done lots of antibiotics and steroids, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And they just found that they were still living with diarrhea on a daily basis and their cats were suffering. And so even though I wasn't promising I could solve the problem, they still wanted to support research to look into it. And so that's sort of, I just couldn't stop thinking about them. And then I sort of explored like, you know, how do you start a business? They had some programs through the business school to try and teach scientists a little bit about that. So I was awarded this small fellowship, Keller
Mm-hmm.
Pathway Fellowship, so that I got to go to weekly monthly lunches with entrepreneurs and people who have experience in this world. And also they have an entrepreneurship academy. And so we had to pitch to friendly, you know, mentors. What's your idea? What problem are you solving? All of that. And so that's sort of how I got started, was through sort of that support.
Awesome. Really awesome. And you know, you mentioned the medical merry-go-round, and you talked about sort of this three-way of the antibiotics, the steroids, the prescription diets, and their effect obviously on, okay, we have this core issue here, we have cats or dogs, they have some GI problems, but at the same time, and I think that I saw this on your, you know, sort of in your literature, you know, you talk about gut health, yes, important, but we're learning, as with humans and everything else, our gut health also impacts everything else, and vice versa in some ways. What are some, you know, besides diarrhea, of course, what are some of the core health issues? And I apologize ahead of time, we're not a cat or a dog family, we're a bird family, but we can talk about birds separately. What are some of the core issues that our cats and dog friends experience as it pertains to both the microbiome and some of the chronic degenerative diseases, chronic health conditions that normally cause problems? I know our cats and dogs are affected by sort of all the stuff that we are, whether it's cancers or diabetes, what have you. What are some of the core issues that you are talking to folks about specifically in this area?
I mean, we definitely started with sort of the IBD, if you will, type cases for cats and dogs. So the chronic enteropathies is what they now sort of refer to it in veterinary medicine. And especially with cats, we're thinking about this link between sort of IBD diagnosis and the development of GI lymphoma. There seems to be a pretty strong connection, though it's never really been established scientifically. It's hard to get funding for this work, but a lot of veterinarians really suspect a link there. There are other health conditions. So we have a clinical trial going on with the University of Helsinki School of Veterinary Medicine, where they're looking at chronic enteropathies in dogs and trying to reduce the use of antibiotics. So when you use metronidazole, or they also use tylosin to resolve diarrhea in dogs, both of those have really high relapse rates. So that study, they're doing a short course of tylosin to get the diarrhea under control, and then they're following it with a fecal transplant using our oral capsules to see if they can reduce the relapse rate by reintroducing these microbes that are found in healthy dogs. Others have looked at, so canine parvovirus, like the addition of fecal transplants to the standard of care seems to reduce the recovery time, and like it's basically, and maybe also increase survivorship if they had, it's like small, but a trend towards that in terms of they need a bigger sample size to statistically show increased survivorship, but it was looking in the right direction. Acute diarrhea has been shown to be to benefit from fecal transplants. We have a study going on with the University of Illinois where they're looking at diabetes mellitus.
Got it.
And an abstract there by Dr. Gall has been accepted for presentation this June, showing that promising signs that blood sugar seems to be better under control in dogs who received sort of oral capsules with healthy stool.
And you know, looking at the AnimalBiome sort of, you know, portfolio in this, and you really have three focuses: assess, restore, and maintain. So assessing the general understanding of what's going on with the microbiome, restoring what's happened in terms of this merry-go-round process of antibiotics and so forth, and then ultimately maintaining on the long term. And I think we can start with the first one of these, the assessing. I know read that you've over the last couple of years you've generated this really robust database of literally 10,000 or so, or 12,000 DNA samples, thousands of animals. Talk a little bit about the tools, the sequencing, whether you're using artificial intelligence, because the microbiome, as we've discussed it a little bit in the past on the show, is a very complex place, right? There's a lot going on there, a wide range of different microbes, viruses, and so forth. Talk a little bit about sort of the data component of this and how you go about assessing these really complex living mixtures, let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, it is a complex ecosystem, and there's so much variation from individual to individual. So we really focus on what the core microbiome. So the groups of organisms that are most prevalent in the healthy populations of cats and dogs. We do have a side project with ferrets as well, not birds yet. And I think having a healthy reference set is really critical, because there's a lot. The healthy individuals, I think, are more similar to each other than all the different sick ones are. There's just a lot of variation among sick individuals and the composition of the gut microbiome. So we break it down in several ways. We think about, so do they have good representation of these core taxa that we find in healthy individuals? Often we find that they can be missing bacteria, and usually this is associated with prior antibiotic exposure, but sometimes you just didn't get everything you needed from mom. I mean, it's just, mom didn't have everything, then it's hard to get. And the bacteria that we're really interested in are not in probiotics today. We have a discovery lab, and we're isolating them and creating sort of the probiotics of the future for that. It's a lot of people doing this for humans. It is really complex. So how do you know which ones and which combinations to create? Like, I think we're going to create thousands of products, but it's really promising. Microbiome is a very promising target, because you can really alleviate a lot of symptoms associated with various diseases through supporting gut health, or the balance of bacteria in the gut. So even if we don't think it's necessarily causing these conditions, or that we can cure them, we can help with symptoms through diet and supplements, and hopefully these cocktails in the future. The other thing that we look at is we find elevated levels of some pathobionts. So pathobionts are commensal bacteria that are normally found in the gut flora, but with the loss of other beneficial bacteria, they can become overgrown. And one really clear example of this is Escherichia coli, or E. coli. And it's so common. It's, almost all cats and dogs have it, and people and, birds and livestock. It's amazing. It's like just very prevalent in birds and mammals. But it should be at really low levels. And when the microbiome becomes depleted, it can become overgrown and actually really contribute to a chronic inflammatory state. And so we have identified a bacteriophage cocktail. So these are little viruses that attack specific groups of bacteria, called Pre4Pro. So it's got 4 phages in it, and it's designed to try and keep down some of the worst E. coli strains. Of course, there are many, many E. coli out there. So we're also doing discovery work to isolate the ones that are most associated with cats and dogs and create new ones in the future.
That's interesting. The bacteriophage connection, which is another one of those really a really cool sort of cocktail focused approach to dealing with these dysregulated cocktails of microbes. It's extremely interesting to hear that you're looking at the phages as well on that front. One of your really interesting papers from, I think, 2019 had to do, one of the areas you're focusing on, as I mentioned in the intro, is sort of understanding some of these interesting probiotic formulations as a way to restore and modulate what's going on in the gut microbiome. And you had this really interesting paper on crickets. And looking at the fact that these crickets and the chitin and the chitosan and all these interesting polysaccharides are beneficial sources of fiber that ferment in certain ways and help modulate in a beneficial way the dog microbiome. Can you talk a little bit about just how you came across the crickets? And I assume this may be one of the probiotic type products you're developing, but whatever you can say about this, I thought this is an interesting paper.
Yeah, well, I have a background in entomology, so and we talked a lot in grad school about how insect protein could be a really great protein source for feeding human populations. So I was really excited to learn about companies like Jimini's that are making cricket and other insect-based dog foods and treats. And they're local to us, so I've become friends with Ann Carlson, who founded that company. And so that's the other fun thing about entrepreneurship, is connecting with other entrepreneurs. She's really interested in science, and so she wanted to include microbiome analysis as part of her digestibility research. So in order to bring a dog food to market with cricket protein, they had to do research to show that it would be digestible and that the dogs would do well on it, because historically insects have been considered a contaminant in the food supply, right? So it's sort of a shifting focus. But the reason there's a lot of interest, right, is because of sustainability, and you can grow a lot of cricket protein in a good way. But it is also super interesting from a microbiome perspective, because they're getting the chitin, right, the exoskeleton of the crickets and the other insects that they can use in these kinds of foods go into the food and actually can help support bacteria that can break them down, and because dogs and people can't on our own digest chitin.
I strangely enough, several months ago had a cricket taco at a local restaurant. So anyway, I was intrigued by that one.
They sell it at the ballpark in Oakland anyway, the A's Stadium.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. Holly, another interesting paper which you just published a couple months ago was in Frontier Veterinary Sciences. It was entitled "Best Practices for Microbiome Study Design and Companion Animal Research," and this is very interesting. You bring in obviously the importance of understanding and how you work with companion animal research, but also the microbiome component. And I think sometimes we talk about human research and we think, oh, companion animal research, that's a lot easier, but there's a lot more that goes into this, and the sort of the uniqueness of the design of these studies when you have both probiotics or nutritional interventions, and you're dealing with people's household pets and so forth. Talk a little bit about why you wrote this paper and some of what, in terms of the best practices, things that you're learning and providing, as you said in this paper, it really is a resource to everybody else out there, whether it's clinicians, researchers that want to study cats and dogs. What are some of the highlights there that you're learning about developing these clinical trials?
Yeah, so we grew out of a citizen science project, the Kitty Biome Project. And so for that, I developed an in-home test kit. So we mail you a kit, you collect a bit of poop, put it in a vial with a fixative and send it back to us. And that approach turns out to be very useful for companies or others trying to do studies to see what's how their products might actually work in the real world and benefit pets who are living in houses as opposed to colonies. Also, right, there's some companies that they don't want to do research with colony animals. They're very concerned about animal welfare.
Yep.
But we've done studies with both. And then we started to realize that people who are smart scientists, know how to design studies, if they don't have some background in microbiome, there's some simple pitfalls that we wanted to help them avoid. Like, for example, say you're even using colony dogs, you need to make sure that you do kind of a washout. Like if they were all on different diets for some other study last month, they need a 30-day washout where they're on the same diet before you can test a product in them if you're looking at microbiome responses. Because otherwise they're going to be all their microbiomes will be starting in different places, and it'll just add a lot of noise, and we won't necessarily be able to pick up the signal of the effect of your supplement or food product if they all start in different places. Another thing we ran into is it's important to have the cats or dogs in the study be somewhat independent. Like you don't want to have you don't want to have like 3 in one house and 6 in another. And so we prefer to have one pet per household in the study, because they're not independent samples otherwise. So that's just something about working with pets in homes. We did do one study where they were trying to look at like adding some bacteria to the cat litter box. I think in that case, it would be important to sort of make sure that like either all the cats are indoor cats, or that you have like similar distribution of ones have access to the outside. Because if you're like adding a soil bacterium to litter, you might not see an effect if they're going outside and rolling in the dirt every day. The other thing that we really like to recommend for people is that they start with a dosage study, because if they don't really know the right dosage, they can invest a lot of money in doing a study. Yep. And then feel really disappointed with the outcome. There's really nothing we can do about it if they don't know their dosage to begin with. So now we really do recommend starting there. We've done probably about 15 studies at this point with partners and for our own products, simply because there was just a lot of interest in this capability that we had. But we aren't trying to be like a contract research organization. We're really trying to like help people and create new products. So, but we have done it to build relationships, and we've learned a lot along the way. And so we wrote up that paper to try and share some of those learnings.
Very cool. On the animal biome website, obviously talk a lot about the gut microbiome, but you also mentioned the skin. And I was wondering if you could say a few words. Obviously, the gut microbiome is sort of what we all think about. We hear the word microbiome, but we're learning about all these other microbiomes that exist everywhere in terms of the skin, genitourinary canals, pulmonary microbiomes, and so forth. What are you doing in terms of the skin? Are you looking at the skin microbiome of cats and dogs as well, and those conditions, or gut microbiome affecting skin, or both?
Yeah, no, so we started with sort of focusing on gut health. We had a lot of people come to us, especially with dogs with chronic skin conditions like atopic dermatitis. Yep. And especially for certain breeds, restoring the gut really seemed to help resolve some of these skin issues. So in microbiome research, there's a lot of interest in sort of the gut skin axis. There's also there's other axes like gut brain, gut liver, sort of the more we look, it's just 70% of the immune system is in the digestive tract. So it's directly connected to the circulatory system. So there's just a lot of gut health is very foundational, but we do know that, of course, it's a complex system, and we don't know everything that's happening. I think the skin microbiome is really interesting, and I do plan to add testing for that as well. It's going to be more fungal. We can test for fungi as well. It's not nearly as diverse, as what you find in the gut for sort of obvious reasons. But if you have a certain fungal overgrowth, it may be important to identify that, and maybe may require some topical solutions in addition to supporting gut health.
How about aging? We've done a couple episodes, one with Matt Caverline's group out in Washington on his rapamycin work in dogs, and then another here at Roswell Cancer Center on sort of the so-called retrobiome and sled dog aging. Any interesting plans to, obviously the connections between the microbiome and healthy aging, I think, is recognized. Anything you're planning either currently or for the future in terms of just cat and dog healthy aging?
Yes, dog aging, cat aging is super important, right? These pets are part of our families, and we want them to live as long as possible. I think we all like to fantasize with our 15-year-old dogs that maybe they'll make 30. So yeah, I'm a big fan of dog aging projects and other efforts like that. There's some interesting products that have been pitched to us that may be helpful for that. We're evaluating them. We don't want to offer false hope for people, and of course, you need long-term studies to really know. But we are a supporter of the Morris Animal Foundation and are doing a big project with their golden retriever lifetime study. So that's giving us an opportunity to look at longitudinal samples taken, over 10 years from these golden retrievers, and start to look at how things change as they age. And so it's definitely an active area of interest. And I mean, we know that most dogs end up dying of cancer, so that's sort of to the development of cancer. So we're really focused on trying to be sort of promoting anti-inflammatory approaches.
And that whole inflammaging component is so prevalent, and it's such a hot topic. That's exciting as well. One other thing, I know that this was a couple of years before you set up AnimalBiome, but I just wanted to ask you about it because it ties into sort of not just the microbiome, but we've gotten into this theme with a few folks on the show of this principle of One Health and the connection between humans, pets, and then the environment and wild species and so forth. And you published the paper, I think it was in 2014, on you were studying the microbiome of healthy mallard ducks and sort of the connection between that and influenza A virus, which I guess ducks and geese are a reservoir of. Any interesting things you're coming across in terms of how our microbiome makes us, or makes our animals, more or less resilient to the infectious diseases, and just thinking to sort of the One Health connection again? Any learnings there as well for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's sort of two things that come up. I mean, the antibiotic use both in human and veterinary medicine, right, is promoting sort of these antimicrobial resistant organisms. And there was really interesting research coming out of Emory where they showed that like people are coming home from the hospital and they're sharing some of those organisms with their dogs. For some reason, it's more between dogs and people than with cats. Maybe the licking the face is a part of that. So yeah, we're directly affecting them. And then there's definitely spread of things like C. diff infections. We have a lot of people reporting C. diff infections in their dogs. That's I think underreported sort of in this. So there isn't a lot of organized like in terms of like veterinary hospitals, like having a database where everyone can know like, oh, this pathogen is emerging in our practices. Campylobacter, there's been a big, I mean, I think that was within dog populations. It started with some breeders and it's been spreading the last 2 years. Not a lot of talk has been happening about that. And I think there is real risk for it to go between pets and humans. I think that, we live so closely with them that like, it's not the One Health, makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about people and their households and their household pets.
Absolutely. Holly, what else is hot for AnimalBiome in 2022? Events that are coming up, conferences that we can watch you or meet you at. Anything else that you want to touch on? Please take the floor.
Oh, sure. I mean, so we're launching a big study to look at the effect of a yeast postbiotic on the skin microbiome, or like one that on skin health. Sorry, looking at the gut microbiome, but also inflammation in the skin in cats and dogs. And we are going to be at several conferences. We're going to be presenting a poster at ACVIM Forum for specialists in veterinary medicine in June. We're also presenting a couple posters at Anaerobe Society, which is more for the microbiologists in the audience. Research that we've done on looking at the benefits of fecal transplants in cats for chronic enteropathies, and also using contemporary genomic techniques to culture hard to isolate bacteria to create these sort of new cocktails. And then we will be at the AHVMA Holistic Veterinary Conference in September.
Outstanding. That's it's going to be an exciting time. It's a fascinating area. I really appreciate you sharing some of the story with us, and going to keep an eye out on everything you have going on. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode on our podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been listening to Dr. Holly Ganz, Chief Science Officer and co-founder of AnimalBiome, doing really amazing things to help our cats and dogs lead longer, happier lives, unlocking the potential of the gut microbiome. Holly, it's a really fascinating story. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about it. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there for our pet friends. And as we say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. It's a really cool story.
Oh, thank you so much.